All right, there we go. So we're recording. I want to welcome everyone here with us today. First of all, I wanted to say Happy National Engineering Month, everyone. March is National Engineering Month. I know we're already getting to, what are we, the 24th here now? So the month has been flying by. And there's been all kinds of awesome things going on throughout the month, but it is just a great time to raise awareness about engineering and share stories about what's been going on in engineering and technology and all kind of that whole world. So we're really excited to have Dilesha Stelmach here with us today. Dilesha, I have a little intro here for to let everybody know a little bit about Dilesha before she jumps in. So Dilesha is an unapologetic STEMinist. She champions inclusion, accessibility, and diversity in STEM. Through her work as founder of Oui STEM Academy, Dilesha has worked to support the growth and education of girls in STEM. As a direct result of her work, Dilesha has gone on to lecture at Howard University and consult the United Nations and the Government of Canada. So excited to have you here, Dilesha. Welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you for joining today. These conversations are incredibly important, and I like to have them very conversationally as well. So I'm hoping to get to some time for us to discuss your own personal experiences and your own opinion on active allyship in particular. So happy National Engineering Month. It's my favorite month, and it's my girls at Oui STEM, it's their favorite month too. Engineering is always the more hands-on and more amazing and engaging of our STEM components. So let me just move right along. There we go. So just a little bit about myself. Like it was mentioned, I lectured at Howard University, and I really do some consultation, especially around inclusion of women and girls in the STEM space, with the government, with other organizations, as well as United Nations. We STEM won the 2019 SDG Leadership Award. So we really focus on partnership, inclusion of women and girls, and really making sure we have quality education for youth. So if we really talk about my story and my introduction to STEM, I think it really talks about inclusion and why this is so important to me in particular. So I would say my STEM story starts around grade 8. At that time, we actually had our math teacher leave, and I was like really excited because I was like, oh, great, no math class. So I loved it. But then fast forward to grade 9. When I was in school, I was having a lot of issues with math in particular. So I was French immersion at the time, and then when I got to high school, I no longer did math and other subjects in French. So I had a real huge delay, right? So I went from having a language delay, there was a gap because we didn't really do math in grade 8 because we had that missing teacher. And my grade 9 teacher literally said the words to me, well, maybe this just isn't for you. And I was really, really discouraged, and I really took those words to heart. And then I was talking to a friend of mine who was like, how is math not for you? Like, that's not even a thing. It's like saying speaking is not for you. Like, it's a language. Math is a language. So I got some extra help. My best friend, who's still my best friend to this day, she's really great with math. She really supported me, and I got some tutoring and formal assistance, and I was able to get through it. I didn't realize how much that had impacted me until my adulthood. Fast forward to taking accounting, and I was just frozen by fear. Like, to this day, if someone's like, oh yeah, 2 and 2, what was that? And I'd be like, 4. Like, I still struggle to do math out loud. I still have those fears because of being told that it was a space that wasn't for me. I also want to say that I don't think people, and I don't think that math teacher was a terrible human being. She's a teacher of 30 plus students. I don't think people realize the power and the impact of their words, and just being inclusive and saying like this space is for you. So I think this is why I really started along my journey to making sure that spaces were inclusive, especially STEM spaces, because already being female, that marginalizes you. You feel like you're not supposed to be in that space. If you speak another language, that may further make you feel like you're not really in the right space for you. You don't see a lot of queer people in that space or outly queer people in that space. So there's a lot of different boxes of someone's identity that would make them feel like the space is just not for you. So we're going to talk a little bit about what active allyship means and just how you can continue to be an active ally. So I think one of the first things to do when you're talking about allyship is to understand your blind spots. So being a female woman of color, I would be like, yeah, I know everything about, being, marginalized, but that doesn't mean I understand what that is like from the queer perspective. That doesn't mean I understand what that is like from a disability standpoint, whether that's physical or mental disability. So there are still a lot of blinders that you can have. So constantly checking yourself, checking the spaces and the ways in which you may not exactly know someone else's lived experience, and affording them the opportunity to speak on their own behalf is incredibly important. Making sure you know that allyship is a process, it's a continuum. You're not just an ally for one moment or one day, which means there's definitely parts of someone's experience that you may not know right now. So for example, I always use this example with my girls. So I walked into my house today, I went down my stairs, I got the mail. I never thought about what it would be like if someone had broken their foot or they have no use of their legs and they needed to get into my house. Does that necessarily mean, I don't like disabled people? No. That means it's not my lived everyday experience, so I never thought about it. But what that does mean is now that I am aware of that, what am I going to do with that information? And that is what active allyship is. It's not a prescription. It's not saying that someone is good or bad. It's here is an issue that you may not even know is an issue, and here's what you can do with your privilege to help these people get on an even playing field. One of the other things that you need to do when we're talking about active allyship is to lean into that feeling of discomfort. So taking yourself out of the equation, your ego out of the equation is really important, because again, people are really quick to defend themselves because we hear things like racism, sexism, homophobia, and you're like, I'm not homophobic, I have a friend who is, or I'm not racist, I have a friend who is, and you really want to defend yourself because you're a good person. But lean into those feelings of discomfort, because there's no chance that if you live and walk on this earth that you haven't ignored someone else's lived experience. So I was born in Canada. I can't speak to the experience of immigration and to come here, like how my parents have, right? So that doesn't mean I don't like people who emigrated to the country, but what that does mean is I need to open the space for them to tell me their challenges and ways that I can support their growth in Canada. So there is no way that you can kind of measure yourself around being a good or bad ally. It just means that you just have to continue to ask yourself questions and check yourself. Check your privilege is what I like to say. Like, what are your privileges? Everyone has a privilege. So I'm female, so I can harp on that as a discriminating factor. We know that. And I'm a woman of color, but what are my privileges? So my privileges would be that I'm able-bodied, that I'm first generation Canadian, meaning that I was born here. So I have educational privileges that other people may not have. And so acknowledging them doesn't negate the fact that you have your own barriers to access, but it does mean that there are things that you can use that other people can't, that advantages yourself or would advantage them. So just checking your own privileges and realizing you have your own biases allows you to become an ally in any way, shape, or form. So you need to have your own awareness. You're willing to create action around that awareness, and then to integrate the person in which you may have marginalized or didn't know was marginalized, and to include them in that space. And then another recommendation I would also have is to build your capacity to receive criticism, which is kind of like not just for allyship. You need to understand that criticism doesn't, again, make you a good or bad person. We just want to make sure that you're able to kind of move forward and receive someone's, not even criticism, but influence, and say, hey, if I say to you, hey, you made me feel like X, receive that, hear it, take it in, and then ask, how could I have changed this? What could I have done better? Because it's not necessarily a verdict on whether or not you're a good or bad person. So another thing that I want to kind of highlight is making sure that you check your own personal prejudices. We all have them because you only have your own lived experience. So you cannot speak to every single person's different individual experiences. So we want to make sure that you understand that you may have your own biases or prejudices, and then once you establish those and find out what those are, you can move forward and make some changes. Pay attention to microaggressions. So a microaggression I heard on a call actually yesterday, I was a judge for the 3-minute thesis, and I heard someone say, oh, well, that person didn't present very clearly. And it was a really, really clear presentation. It was a very complex subject, but that person had an accent. They had a Spanish accent. And so people may not realize that you're associating not being clear with someone's accent. And that could have really penalized that person if I didn't recognize that, hey, I don't really think that presentation was unclear. I think maybe you needed to put your captions on, or you maybe needed to listen a little bit closely, because that was a very, very clear and amazing presentation. So being able to kind of pay attention to those type of things allows you to be a better ally and to advocate for someone who is in a different position than you are. Which also leads into unconscious biases. So those would be things that you don't even really perceive as a bias, but next time something annoys you, maybe take a moment and think, why is something annoying me? Why is this bothering me? It may actually be a bias that you have against a particular mannerism or thing that you find a little bit unagreeable. So just really take the time to create that space for other people to voice their own opinions, and also to for you to learn about yourself and your own biases. This is a really, really big one. Do your own research. It isn't the burden of a marginalized group to educate you on that group. Should they do it? Yes. Would they do it? Probably, but it's not their bias and their burden to make you do the research for them. So go out and understand different people, marginalized groups, understand what they go through. You can ask them, say, hey, I've been reading about X, reading about Y. I would love to sit down and discuss my understanding of what's going on. That takes the burden off of them to educate you fully. And also maybe not strangers, right? Because they may not want to speak to those particular experiences. But it's really important that you at least do some of the research yourself, because it's not on a marginalized group to really do the education for you and put everything out there on the table, especially in the information age, especially in the internet era when everything is so accessible. Do some of the work yourself and maybe ask for validation, or maybe, can we have a conversation about this and talk about what that is? And if they don't feel it's too exhausting, then of course, by all means, go ahead and do so. And then the final point would be use some of your own privileges to benefit someone else. So everyone has some sort of privilege. you can use that to benefit someone else who is in a marginalized group. So I talked about disability, again, advocating and talking about that with individuals who may also not have thought about those limitations is something that I could do. Men can bring women into spaces, things of that nature. Just identify your own privileges and then use them in order to allow another group to amplify their own voices. We don't always have to speak for another group. Sometimes it's stepping aside and saying, you know, hey, do you want to come and speak about this? Do you want to come? We're having a planning committee. I would love for you to consult on that and bring them in and let them have their own voice and voice their own opinions and limitations themselves so that they can really have their own seat at the table and you can have a holistic view of what they are going through on a day-to-day basis. So I think that will be the end of sort of like the presentation portion. I really wanted to have some conversations because this is, like I said, allyship is about learning about other people. And we can assume that someone doesn't have any sort of limitations, but I just wanted to, you know, get your ideas about your own experiences and things that you, even questions you may have had to ask, you know, you may wanted to ask someone. And just have that ability to kind of have some dialogue because that's what really pushes allyship forward is a conversation.
Thank you so much, Dilesha, for sharing. And we're a pretty small group here today, so feel free to just unmute yourself and have that conversation, ask questions if you'd like. Maybe just to get things going, Dilesha, I mean, you talked about your experience being told maybe math's not a place for you and you don't belong here. And with the work you've done with Oui STEM Academy, I'd love to just know if there's kind of unique challenges with oppressed groups in where when it comes to the STEM space, STEM education, STEM careers, that sort of thing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Of course, of course. So one of the unique challenges that we have is that people are identifying that STEM is a very important space. It's the way of the future. It's the type of education that everyone should really be trying to push children towards in particular. But there isn't that inclusivity from, let's even look at textbooks. They don't really look like you. You don't really see yourself when we're looking at even if we're looking at a book for engineers, the book doesn't really have a female engineer, for example, or the breadth of different engineers that you can engineering careers that you can get into. So I think a lot of the issue right now is diversity of language and imagery. And then, of course, the education piece. So teachers are very limited by their own expertise and their own experiences. So that's why we have organizations like We STEM, because a lot of teachers understand that I may not be able to speak to everything. Like I may be an English teacher, but I really want someone to come in with this sort of experience. And so, you know, we have organizations like myself that we go in and we are able to connect with other engineers in different spaces, other scientists, people in the tech space, and really giving that place and that space for other voices to come through and for people to see, you know, queer people come through, people, we have the amazing, you know, mathematicians on Instagram that do a lot of drag and math, which is really amazing. So showing people that you can be creative, but you could also be in the STEM space, and just showing that diversity, I think is really what is pushing the change forward, because that is truly what's missing. It's not like we haven't had these subjects. It's not like we don't have the textbooks, we don't have the means, but it's about putting yourself in that space. And that comes from representation and diversity.
I'm so curious to know if your math friend that encouraged you to think of math as a language, it wasn't Vanessa, was it? The math guru? Do you know Vanessa?
It wasn't, but I do know Vanessa, and I love her.
It sounds like something she would have said.
Right? It was pre-knowing Vanessa, but yeah, I know her very well, and all of that kind of language and all of that kind of discourse for students in particular is really, really important. I don't think people realize how important, they call it the language of business, right? Math is the same across the entire world. So to make students feel as though it isn't a space for them is really, really problematic. Because if you want to be a chef, like, you need to know how to do math. If you want to be a musician, that's fractions. Like, you need to understand math in any single space that you go into. And so, no, but it is a concept that I repeat to every student that I have contact with, that it's just like a language. It's just like any other subject. You just need to practice. You're not good at anything you don't practice. So you love soccer and you do that every single day. That's actually practice. You're just having fun doing it, and just showing them that it's repetition and it's just putting yourself in that space and finding your faults, right? Being okay with failure and recognizing that just tells you need to work on it more.
I really related to what you were describing when you were saying, like, someone asks you, like, what's 2 + 2, and you kind of like freeze. And I've
Yeah.
talked with other kids about this too, because I think it's really powerful for kids to hear an adult, a grown up, someone who's in a STEM role say, I struggle with doing mental math sometimes. And I've used this example before, that like I'm like you, Dilesha. If someone asks me to like calculate something on the spot, I freeze. Um, but I think of it like you said, thinking about your weaknesses and what are my strengths? Where do I actually have things I can bring to the table? And um, when we're talking to a lot of kids in Ontario, we like to talk about and relate it to hockey, because it's something that everyone likes to talk about here in Canada, and how, what if you had a whole team filled up with all, I mean, we're near Toronto, so personally here we're Toronto fans. So we say, what if you had a team filled up with all Austin Matthews and all you could do was score goals, but you didn't have a goalie? Like, what if you put Austin Matthews in net? Like, that would be horrific, right? And that
Right?
idea of like, where are your strengths? But it's important to know your weaknesses too. Like, Austin knows he can't play in net, so we need to get like an Anderson in net, because that's his strength. Um, I share the story too. I mean, looking at as a team, and a lot of time in STEM roles, we're working together with teams. I'm not great at mental math. My husband, who's an engineer, is excellent at mental math. We balance each other out there. But what where he's not as strong is being able to see like objects in his mind and like turn them around and see what they would look like from the other side. And I like to share a story that we both went to Queen's University, and one of the courses we had to take there was mechanical drawing. So
Right.
he struggled. He actually failed that course like 3 times before he could get it. And for me, I was like, this is a breeze. Like, what are you doing? What's wrong with you? Why is this so hard for you? So I think for kids to see that, like you said, they can connect and relate to someone that's actually doing a role that maybe they thought was off the table for them, because now they've met someone who they can see themselves in, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's really important to be transparent. I think that's the thing that I've learned throughout my life that has really contributed to my successes. I'm okay with not knowing. I'm not okay with not learning. So I'm taking a math course right now that's pertaining to some of the business math that I have to do in the director role that I'm in. I'm always learning, because I realize as I'm doing things, I'm like, oh, I'm just not confident with it. It's not that I don't always know. I'm just like, I'm not confident with this. And I actively say that. I sit down with my son. He's actually at TMG, the math guru. So he does his sessions at 8 o'clock on Wednesday. 8 o'clock on Wednesday, he'll see me take my textbook out and I'm reading. I'm constantly learning and just kind of building, especially on my particular weaknesses, because I know where I'm strong. Not to say I don't have to exercise every part of my being, but I also know, okay, I want to be more confident in this. It's not okay to be like, oh, I'm terrible at math, or I'm terrible with, you know, any sort of particular subject, and just leave it at that. I know I have my own limitations and I'm working on that. And I think allowing that space, allowing, you know, the ability to practice, right? So that when you're in a more, if you're in a test or in a work situation, you've like, okay, I've done this before. I think that's what's really different between school and real world, right? With the real world, there aren't any tests per se. It's like you're just in the meeting, you're just doing that project. It's now or never. So I give myself test environments because I don't like that kind of pressure. And I do that from continuing to take Con Ed courses, going through workshops, just being able to kind of test and bounce my ideas off of friendly peers who are strong where I'm weak and weak where I'm strong, and we can just kind of help each other just build and move forward. Because I think lying to yourself and being like, oh, no, I'm great with everything is actually a detriment. Like, we all have our limitations. So being able to kind of work on them and work collaboratively, get people's advice, hear how, you know, someone else looks at it. So being like, okay, Rebecca, I don't understand this at all, and you seem to be amazing with this. How do you get it? Because for me as well, it's how other people look at it. So walking me through your process could actually help me understand it, because maybe I just don't get the steps very well. So I think everything in life is collaboration.
Well, and I think that's why, you know, you just spent, you know, the last half an hour talking to us about allyship and how we can be active allies. And that really speaks to the why. Why do we need to do that? Because we need to have all those different ways of thinking, different lived experiences, so that we can collaborate with people in different ways. We can be good listeners. We can learn. We can solve problems in the best way possible, right? I remember. This was going back a few years now, but we had a conversation with the Dean of Engineering at Queen's, and he was talking about how engineers solve problems. And so if we don't have engineers that represent our society, because they're solving problems for people, they're solving problems for their communities, for their societies, then there's going to be gaps because of those biases, because of those blind spots. So we need to have all of those people at the table so that we can design the best solutions possible. I was wondering if you could share maybe a little bit more about Oui STEM, Dilesha. I was looking at the website as we were preparing for our conversation today, and I really like just the story of how you came up with the name, or I don't know if it was you, but how like kind of what the name represents. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, for sure. I did come up with the name. So basically, Oui STEM, so I did a lot of work with another organization called Hervolution. They're an amazing STEM organization as well. And I really thought about what I wanted to do in the STEM space, which is really revolves around partnerships. I think what was really lacking is the ability to kind of reach out to a network and get things done. So everyone was creating programming and things of that nature, which I think is amazing. But I think trying to create another center, for example, just took students away from another center. So I really wanted to go into the spaces where students already reside and already occupy space, and just kind of bring programs to them. So Oui STEM, OUI, is a French word for we, which is yes, which is how it's spelled, but it also sounds like we. Which really speaks towards that kind of like inclusivity. And I really wanted it, when you hear it from an Anglophone perspective, you're thinking we STEM, so like we all do STEM, but really saying yes to STEM. Like STEM is everything. Like, I think people, even they like to put the A in there for art to make it STEAM, but that the whole point of STEM is that it's everything. It's music, it's art, it's cooking, like culinary arts, it's everything. It's engineering and technology. So really bringing that kind of collective, collaborative feel to STEM environment was really the purpose of why We STEM is created. And we've done many workshops. So we do both very super technical workshops, so blockchain coding, really technical sort of engineering, but we also do really hands-on and less technical, and trying to get to the individuals that don't already know that they love STEM and they want to be in the STEM space. So it's about melding the two. So high achievers, people that already know, like there's some people that are like, I want to be a surgeon at like 2. And then there's some people who just don't really know what they want to do. And we want them to also know you need these traits. Like, did you know you were an engineer? When you thought about how you can get your skateboard down that ramp, you're actually, using the same skills as a person who builds a building, creates software. Like, it's the same sort of muscles that you're using in your brain. Just keep yourself open to all the possibilities that are out there.
It's so true. We see those kinds of kids almost like they're in 2 buckets, where there's the kids that teachers will tell you right away. They're like, I know those kids are going to go into engineering, which is fantastic. But what we've seen is that as those kids go through the system, they choose engineering, they still come out the other side not really knowing what engineering is. They know they love the math and science, but they don't necessarily know, or not maybe connected to the social impact of engineering and things like the UN Sustainable Development Goals and that side of engineering, the motivation behind it, so that when it gets hard, because it will, it's hard for them to feel that. And then there's that other sort of group or bucket of kids we see, like you were describing, Dilesha, where they just haven't got the memo, right? They think that maybe they've been told, just like you were, that you don't belong here, or they think they want to, like my kids are like, I want to be a professional hockey player, and I'm like, well, that's great, but when that doesn't work out, did you know you could be an engineer and work in the hockey space, like in the hockey industry, and have those kinds of conversations, right? Amazing.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure, like, Reza and Linda, if you have any questions, I feel like I'm hogging all of Dilesha's time here. Please feel free to jump in.
Yeah, honestly, you can hear my puppy. He is.
Did you get a wasn't it Puppy Day yesterday or something? National Puppy Day?
Yes, it was Puppy Day, and he got lots of peanut butter. Someone came to the door, and now he's going crazy.
What's your puppy's name?
His name is Sir Charles Barkley. My son named him.
That's a mouthful.
Yeah, so we had another puppy. His name was Principe, that we had to put down, but he wanted him to sound royal, but also to be tied into basketball. So, royal and basketball.
Sure. Love it. Love it. Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, is any questions from is it Reza?
Right. So I do actually, it resonated with me so much, your story about your teacher saying, oh, maybe this is just not for you, because this is exactly what happened to me when I was in high school, though. And my math teacher was, I guess, she wasn't my biggest fan, I guess. And then she often, like more than one time, she came and she was telling me, oh, Raisa, I can't understand, why are you, the high school class that I was in was intense computer science and math profile. So we would have a lot of math and computer science classes. And I was just not doing well in math because I wasn't going for her private classes. So I was just whatever, studying math on my own and whatever, and I wouldn't pay her for private classes. And at the same time, I was very good with languages. So I would go for competitions in French, and I would go to all this, national whatever, anyways. And then she was, oh, Raisa, I can't understand. Why are you spending your time here, taking so much, like with math and informatics and computer science and whatever, when you're so good at languages? Why are you not choosing the other profile, like on the arts side? And I was like, whatever, you can say whatever. And that was 4 years of my high school. She kept telling me why am I wasting my time here and not going, and sure enough, then I went for engineering. I went into private classes for my final high school my final year in high school. I went into private classes with another teacher. And then sure enough, I got into university. I had to pass a very difficult exam. And then my first exam was in algebra. And I got a 10 out of 10. So then I messaged now my prof, and the one that I was taking private classes with, and I said, here is my first mark. My first exam, I got it. And then he's, yeah, no surprise there. And I said, maybe I should go and tell her now, my other prof, maybe I should go and tell her, when you were telling me 4 years of my life, you were telling me how I'm bad and math is just not for me and whatever. Here you go. I got, I'm in university, I made it. So, but anyways, I was thinking how, thank God, it didn't, obviously somehow it did affect me, but it could have been really, had I been maybe a child that was really lacking self-confidence or so, I would have said, well, yeah, it's really not for me, so yeah, I'll go and I'll change, I'll go and study arts. And so I realized how damaging having a teacher like this, how damaging it really can be, for your future career and for your future growth. And so anyways, I guess I was lucky that it didn't, I made it and it didn't discourage me, but it would have been so easy to go that way, or to get, depressed, discouraged, lack of self-confidence, as I said. So anyways, that was, as I said, it really resonated when I heard your story. I thought, yes, I know. I was there.
I'm so happy that for you, it empowered you rather than discouraged you. Because you know what? We're probably not in the minority. There's probably a lot of, and you have to understand, before people didn't see the correlation, right? When I was a kid, I really, really, really loved science, but the only thing that I ever saw, my mom's a nurse, was nursing and doctors. And I don't like blood and sick people. And I was like, oh no, I can't do it. And now, because of this whole STEM push, we're seeing research scientists, we're seeing just the breadth of different sort of careers that you can have. At that time, it was really streamlined. They thought you either thought mathematically or you thought artistically. That's it. And really, what we've come to know is that you need to harvest both. You need both. We need very mathematical and critical thinking people that are also creative. And so, yes, your brain kind of leans towards one or the other, but that doesn't mean you go to one or the other. That means you develop the part of your brain that is lacking that in that area. So for me, it was in the sort of mathematical, technical area, which is ironic because my start in underwriting and group insurance was analytical. That's how I started everything. But I think that was because it's what came the least naturally to me. So I needed to work on math, sciences, all those type of subjects. And because of that, I actually became more refined in those areas. But not every student is like you and I. Not every student is like that because they're told this is, can you imagine? This is your authority figure. This is the person who not only marks and grades you, they know all when you're young. And they're saying this isn't for you. What?
I think one of my favorite things about engineering, when you're talking about the creative and the differentiation between arts and science and math, one of my favorite things, I think one of the things that drew me to engineering was that you get to turn ideas into reality. Like, it's fun. Like, that's creative. Like, I get to take what's going on in my head and make it come true. And so it's all, like you said, Dilesha, it's all really merged together. Like, we have to be creative. We have to think outside the box. Um, and in order to come up with the best solutions and help people in the best way possible.
For sure, for sure. And I think the way that we're thinking now has been really like to not overbeat the subject of active allyship, but I think it comes from that partnership. So there are people like Reza and I who are like, hey, like this has happened to me. We need to make some changes. And because of that, people who weren't aware of just one comment, you know, and it could have been that teacher's way of trying to be like, you need a tutor, but instead of saying you need a tutor, they made me feel like I wasn't belonging in a space. And so telling them to reframe their very helpful advice that just came from a very, it came from a great place, but it came off as something that was very argumentative and just not helpful at all. And saying, maybe you can rephrase your help. So maybe you could offer me support next time instead of making me feel like I don't belong. And I think you don't always have the voice to have those conversations. So now I'm an adult, I have the language and the confidence to do something like that. 14-year-old me did not have that confidence. So when we're talking about being an active ally, that's what that means. That means now in my 30s, I make it my mission to talk to people and to call people out on behavior like that, because a 14-year-old girl may not be able to have that voice. They may be able to tell you that it impacts them in some sort of way, but not in the eloquent way of pointing it out to making you realize where you've had your own faults. And I think currently we only really think about allyship in a very linear way. So when we talk about male, female, you know, race relations, things like that, but it really is with everything. It's using whatever privilege you have at any point in your day to benefit someone else. So that could be like, if I hear someone, a teacher doing that to a student, being, you know, calling the teacher aside at a later point, not in front of a student. I think that's always not productive. But saying, hey, can we have a meeting? And then saying, you know what, I think that was helpful that you identified that they had some barriers, but maybe what would be helpful is doing XYZ in the future. And why don't we get Dilesha some help, right? So just calling out those behaviors, because no one can see what they're doing in the moment and how it's problematic and how it's hurtful. But hindsight's 20/20. So helping them see it before it becomes a pattern of behavior that's damaging to multiple people down the road.
Yeah, I love it. I wondered if maybe to kind of wrap things up, if you maybe had any like maybe this is something you get asked often, I don't know, but what kind of advice would you give to aspiring STEM professionals, or maybe your younger self, or the younger Reza that was being told that she didn't belong there? Do you have some words of advice that you could share?
I always give them the advice to embrace failure and to kind of reframe it. Because where you may see something as failure, it's actually your opportunity for growth. So when we look at, you know, the experiences that Reza and I had, that could have been failure. Your teacher's telling you you're failing, you're awful. Like almost literally what was being told to us. But because you frame it in your head a little bit different, it's like, well, I need this and I want to do this, so I'm going to make some changes. So just kind of reframe failure, embrace it as a natural course of life. We're going to have areas where we are less than strong, and then work forward. But also, if you can't find your voice, find someone else with a voice that can help you get your message across, because that's also very important, is that people be able to speak up and talk about their experiences.
I just love everything you said.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And what I would add, sorry to cut you off,
Go
Rebecca,
ahead.
what I would add is really the stigma that it's too hard, and it's not necessarily for women or girls, and this is something that I'm really fighting, and is very close to my heart when I see girls that are, you know, younger girls or so. It's yeah, but it is hard. Yes, it is hard, but you will feel amazing when you do stuff by yourself. And as you say, you know, the beauty of engineering is that you come with an idea and you actually can bring that idea to reality. So why, like, yes, it is hard, but we can do it, and you can do it. So why is it just because you're a girl? Again, like that stigma. So I feel like I'm doing whatever I can to really fight that stigma, and to really, I'm looking to inspire, whether it's in Canada among my peers at work, or whether it's back home with kids or whatever, you know, that I have a chance to talk to. I'm always insisting on, yes, but don't get scared. It's hard, but don't get scared, because the satisfaction that you get at the end, it's really, really something amazing, and it is worth. So go, and you will suffer a little bit for, you know, the years of your studying and whatever, and it won't be always fun, but it's so like, again, the satisfaction that you're getting out of it, to me, it's just priceless. So yes, you will fail, and yes, you will have sleepless nights, and yes, it will be, you know, you will have your moments when you will think like, I'm going crazy here. But again, you know, it's hard, but it's like, it's really amazing. This is for me, really.
I love it, Reza. And I like how I think what we see is that the conversation tends to end at math and science is hard, or whatever's hard. But I love how you're saying, yes, but you can do it, and it's worth it. Like that part of the conversation gets left out a lot of the time, I think. So I'm excited to hear you talking about it that way. I'm really excited because I know that you're doing the volunteer work you're doing with the Future City experience, that I know those kids are getting that message from you. So that's just so powerful for all of them to hear. You know, like you said, Dilesha, there's the whole girls, boys, men, women conversation, but really it's good for everyone to hear those messages, and think about how, so that in the future. And by the way, I don't know if I mentioned this, the theme in for National Engineering Month this week is focus on the future. So you know that in the future, then they can become those active allies, right?
For sure, for sure. I love wrapping up on that note, because it's very true. It's hard, but it's worth it, and it's possible. And I think that's it. That's the period. That's how you can emphasize the message. And I think as adults and as people in this space, it's really important for us to also talk about the failures that we've had along the way, so people can understand. Because yes, I won all of these awards, but let's look at all of these ones that I didn't win, or all of these courses that I did fail, or me being 30 and still I will take courses until the day I die, because I think learning is a continual process, and there's always something you can add on to it. So I think talking about that and showing your students that, you know what, there were a lot of people that thought I couldn't do this, but I knew I could, and I kept on persevering. So I love that. You inspired me. I came to speak to you, but you inspired me.
Amazing. Well, I guess we'll kind of wrap things up. Before we wrap up too much, Dilesha, I was hoping you could just share a little bit about where you're going with Oui STEM. I know there's been some great stuff you've done over the last year. I'd love to hear a little bit about where you're going with Oui STEM.
For sure. We're going virtual, so we've done a lot of virtual workshops, a lot of partnerships with organizations, Black Physicians of Toronto, Jean Augustine Center, Leadership by Design, a lot of organizations that already work with youth. We're hoping to revamp our project abroad. We really want to bring STEM to other countries. We have a partnership with Jamaica. We were supposed to go down and train some teachers, but then COVID happened. So now that it looks like it's something to stay, we're trying to pivot on how we can internationally train teachers abroad and how to bring STEM education that's pertinent to their regions. We have scholarships with Ontario Tech University and Ryerson for women in STEM. So we like to promote those and make sure that people are getting out there and applying for those, because that's also really important to help fund education. And then we're looking for active partnerships. So anything where someone would like a little bit more support from, you know, marginalized groups or like information, even just getting some, you know, more volunteers in particular spaces. So we're really looking to expand our partnership front as well.
Amazing. So much going on. You're a busy lady, Dilesha.
Just a little bit.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights on how we can be better allies, and sharing your own personal story, your own personal STEM story. I think that in itself is just an amazing way to connect. So thanks again for that. And I also want to thank the sponsors that at Engineers of Tomorrow help us do the great work that we do. Like you said, Dilesha, we love having collaboration and great partners to work with. It's a way to really, you know, amplify the amazing work that's happening. So thank you to Woodbridge Foam, Queen's Faculty of Engineering and Applied Science, Linamar, and Smith and Anderson for supporting some of that work that we're doing. And yeah, so that's we're just about coming up on an hour here. Thank you everyone for taking some time out of your day to connect with us and join us for this great conversation.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, ladies.